obviously there's no one here right now. So if you're catching up with this later, you may need to skip a bit ahead because I've just logged on and I'm waiting for others to join, and that often takes about 8 minutes I normally give. So if you're catching up, just jump 8 minutes into the future and I'll see you there. Ah, right. I always feel the need to talk. Ah, our first person has logged on. Hello, number one person. Who are you and where'd you come from? Feel free to leave a comment. And if you've never been here before and just inspecting what this live is all about, this is all part of a read-along of the Radetsky March, which was a forerunner to the Classics Book Club, which I need to announce, and will probably announce even more through this video. In my last video, Hello Suzette, how are you doing? Great to have you on. That's marvellous. I don't know if you've seen it, Suzette, but the Classics Book Club, I've started the discussion board on a site called Discord, and there is a link. I'll try and put it in this video somewhere, but I can't do it right now. But there's in the last video that I did, it's only short, it's about the Classics Book Club. In the comments, I've pinned my comment to the top. So the first comment you come to, it will have a link, which if you press it, should take you through to the site Discord. You may have to sign up your own account. But once you do, you can just become part of the Classics Book Club. So greetings from Greece. Well, I mean, I say from Greece. I recognize the writing as Greek. Are you actually from Greece? From Greece. Wonderful. Oh, now there's a country I'd love to visit. I used to love ancient Greece in my teens. Spent ages reading books about ancient Greece. And one of these days, I hope also to start investigating much more thoroughly the classical literature, Greek literature, like Sophocles. I read the Iliad recently, but the translation I had wasn't great. So I need to go back to that. And I'm also looking forward to reading, the Odyssey, which is the next one. And there's plenty, the Theban plays I also want to watch. Ah, thank you, Suzette. Yeah, I hope you have no difficulty. Some person said they've had a few difficulties logging onto the Classics Book Club. If you're just logging in right now, I'll repeat this a few times, so sorry if I get boring. I've now got the Classics Book Club, which is open to anyone. It's free. I've got a discussion board now set up on the website Discord. Now, if you want to get it, you need to go to my last video on YouTube, go to the comments, and the top comment is the one that's pinned by me. And there is a link that you just press there and it will take you through to Discord. It's an invite to join the Classics Book Club. Just part way on your way there, it may ask you to make your own personal account for Discord so that you can get in. So do that, then have a look around and start leaving comments. And if you don't know already, in the Classics Book Club, which is the first one ever this March, we are reading The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas, and it is awesome. I love this book. It's so good. But of course, this video is all about the Radetsky March and finishing it off. My, oh my, what a great, great piece of... I loved the ending. I'm waiting for more to join, give them time to join. That's why I'm just waffling now. But anyone who has finished reading the Radetsky March, did you enjoy the way it ended? And the writing? I'm learning to pause as well so that I give people time to write back, make your comments. I was blown away by the end of this book. It was the way it all crystallized, the way it all pulled itself together was out of this world. I loved it. Some brilliant writing as well. And woven through with really subtle, old-fashioned bits of natural symbolism. So birds, flowers, etc. Which I can't go through all of that in this conversation, but my oh my, there was a lot to get out of that. A deep amount of thought went into this by Roth. And I can't wait to get started. But like I say, I'm just waiting for a few more to join. Hello, person number 4. Someone's just logged in. How'd you do? What's your name and where'd you come from? If you want to say hi to everybody, feel free. And if you're just coming in accidentally wondering what this live is all about, we're finishing a discussion of the Radetsky March by Joseph Roth, which has been going for the past 4 weeks. So yeah, and if you're interested in joining a book club, then subscribe to this channel because, well, I'm starting a brand new book club for free for everybody. Trying to think what time it is where everyone else is. So in Britain it is 5 to 9. Hello from India. Wow, what time is it there? Advait. What time is it there in India? Like I say, it's 9 in the evening in Britain, which I'm guessing must make America about the East Coast about 4 o'clock. 2 a.m. Oh my days. Wow, fair play you. This is hardcore love of literature you've got, being up at that time of night. Or you may just be a night bird. I come awake at night, so try and get me up in the morning. It's dreadful. I'm going to give it about 1 more minute for others to log on. So if you want to go and grab a water or a cup of tea or something like that before we kick off, go ahead and do it. I'll wait for you. Oh, brilliant. Right, I want to tell you, if you've just discovered me, we're just opening up a brand new book club called the Classics Book Club. This was sort of a preliminary discussing the Radetsky March, but in my last video, before this one, you can, in the comments, on the first comment, you can find a link to the Classics Book Club. And go and join. It's free, and we're going to be reading The Three Musketeers in March. There's people from all around the world joining in. It's quite a lot, actually. I've just got to get the message out to them that they can join the discussion board now. So feel free to come and join us. Advait. Is that how you pronounce it? It's nice to make your acquaintance anyway. Woo woo! Well done, you. That's brilliant. I have no idea how that works, so I'm going to be learning and crafting that site, that discussion board, as we go along with all of you. So any input you've got, feel free to share it, and slowly but surely I'll put out little videos when I've added other bits and bobs to it to tell people what updates there are. So but yeah, thanks for joining. Looking forward to it. Right, I think it's about time to start. I think I may have thrown everyone because normally we're on at 8 o'clock, aren't we? But I couldn't do it yesterday. So, the Radetsky March. Oh my days, what a brilliant ending to the book. Through the past 3 sessions, which you may have watched, you've noticed Roth has been looking back. He wrote this book in 1932. He was Jewish, so he didn't have particularly his own homeland, Israel not formed until, what, 1948. So he belonged, his fatherland was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so it's all he knew. And then it collapsed at the early onset of World War One. And Roth is looking back, and this has been called the elegy or the elegy. I know elegy is the proper way to say it, but a little idiosyncrasy of mine is to say elegy, partly because I believe in ancient Greek, the G was normally hard. And I knew someone that spoke ancient Koine Greek, and they were quite strong on this point. So I end up saying elegy instead of elegy at times. Anyway, This is the elegy to the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Roth, through the story, has been looking at what it was like to be there, growing up there, the formalism, the pomp, the aristocracy, the pecking order, quite strict pecking order of society, and the strictures of society as well. There's a lot we've noticed all reading this together of how the fathers and sons, they can't express proper emotion to each other. They are constrained by formality. But that formality has a reason, has an underpinning, and it only becomes clear through the book. Hello, person who's just logged on. Nice to have you with us. Oh, they've logged off again. Through this book, we've had lots of musings of Roth. And then in this last section, you couldn't quite put your finger on what he was aiming at. There was a lot of nostalgia. There was the idea of empire as almost a religious ideal, that the emperor was the apostolic king appointed by God. So there's the divine right comes into play there. But an age of skepticism is born in the 19th century towards the latter end, and it provides a new generation who don't just accept the divine underpinnings of the Austro-Hungarian empire. And we see this breakup, this fragmentation of the empire taking place. But in the latter part of this book, so we were reading chapter 17 to the end, it all comes together. Roth does not explicitly say the point of the book, because I don't think he quite fully formulated the idea himself, but as he's tackled with his own reminiscings, his own thinkings of the place he once grew up in, he hits upon something which pulls all this book together and is remarkable for us. This is where we, if you've watched my channel for any time, you know that I say classic books are great because they cause us to engage and talk with the author in the past, to weigh and consider what they have to say, their perspectives, to learn from them. So I'm going to go through, not all of the chapters, but I'm going to go through some bits, which was just great, pulls it all together. So let's start in chapter 17, about 3 pages in, and there's just this mention of Frau von Tausig. Now you'll remember that Karl Joseph, the younger of the Trotter family, he got into an affair with Tausig, and we learned last week that she seems to be very symbolic of Austro-Hungary itself. She represents all that is. She's beautiful but aging. She lights up when she's surrounded by the pomp and circumstance and ceremony of empire. Now, Karl Joseph has gone away, but then in this chapter, it says this interesting comment. It says, he went to see Frau von Tausig. For weeks now, he had been undertaking these brief secret visits, these, check this out, sinful pilgrimages to Frau von Tausig, like simple believers to whom a pilgrimage is a pleasure, a distraction, and sometimes even a revelation. This is great, because as the book's pulling to its end, he's been driven into debt trying to court Frau von Tausig, just like the men of the day, the young men, have been driven into sort of a decline, trying to live up to the ideal of empire. But here, with Frau von Tausig, he says it's like a pilgrimage, this religious idea, this ideal. He wants to break free from it. There is a Discord, Marion. There is a Discord. Go to my last video. On the comments, the last video is just like an announcement of the book club. In the comments, I've pinned the top comment, which has got the link to Discord. Go and join. Would love to have you there. And in case you don't know, we're reading Three Musketeers this month, and that is one brilliant book. But back to Radetzky. So there's this link here that he pays pilgrimages to Frau von Tausig, his sort of older lover, and it's a guilty pleasure and a distraction. He hearkens for the spiritual connection to the empire. And the reason it's a spiritual connection, remember, we've mentioned the emperor is the apostolic emperor, so he's appointed by God, apparently. But second to that, like any pseudo-religious concept that one puts faith in, it is an ideal that binds the whole thing together. And this is where the huge problem for the fall of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy comes about. And you see it in this book. It's like Roth just stumbles upon it. A bit later in this book, I'm just flicking through, I've got notes jotted here and there. There is a conversation that breaks out. It's in chapter 18. And is it 18 or 19? It might be 19. Bear with me. That's right. Just before chapter 19, there's a meeting between Franz Joseph, the emperor, and Franz Trotter. That's Karl Joseph's dad. They're both old men, and they meet because Franz wants to bail out the debt that his son has got into, inherited from the gambling rank and file of the army. And, you know, he's also got into debt because of Frau von Tausig. And it's like the young men have been subsumed by the empire, that it's drawn their life out of them trying to live up to this ideal, which they've been raised to believe in, the ideal of empire, but really there is no genuine faith there. So they are, you would say, spiritually bankrupt regarding belief in the empire. And that's very significant. Now, Franz, his father, can't bail him out. So he goes to the emperor and asks him, can you pay off my son's debts? And he does. But the little meeting between those two old men is just farcical. All the forms and the manners and the etiquette of the old regime, they don't look right anymore. What once was glorious just looks a bit silly. These two old men with drippy noses and big moustaches. And it's sad to see it, really. But this is quite a key thing because it leads into chapter 19, and this is where it all comes up. Look at this page. I don't know if you can see this. There's scribbling all over it, right? This page, in this version, it's page 315. It's just everything. I love it when this happens. Everything just went and pulled together. An idea springs out that suddenly you can interpret the whole book by, and it made the ending of this just a joy to read. And it's this. A new captain arrived where Karl Joseph is working as a lieutenant. One Captain Lorenz, which is very interesting because they've got an Italian name there. Remember, the Austro-Hungarian Empire binds lots of peoples together. It says about him, he was a slow-moving, portly, cheerful type with an invincible tendency to slovenliness, both in person and in the performance of duty. This hit me between the eyes. One thing that we've constantly had when reflecting, quick question, what do you think about Martin Gilbert's The First World War? Does that give enough information about the history? Martin Gilbert's First World War. That's a really, really well-respected book. Have I read Gilbert's? I'm gonna have to hold fire on commenting on that. It is a very, very well-known book. I believe it's got a lot of the background to the First World War, if I remember correctly. So I'll have to look into that and comment back to you. So, where was I? Slovenliness. One thing the empire was not was slovenly. It was decorous. It was full of propriety, of certitude, of exaggerated manners, you could even say. It was never slovenly. But suddenly, we've got this new generation. We've had different characters come and go. We see Franz being the older character. Franz Joseph, the emperor, is old. But Karl Joseph and his generation, as they're coming up through the ranks, there is this tired, bedraggled, slovenly, couldn't care less, motley attitude amongst the army of the empire. And this signifies the massive break. What I got out of this was the massive pendulum swing. Often in human affairs, you get the pendulum effect. So you have the empire, Austro-Hungary, and it now stands for everything that is refined, high, wonderful, elegant, brilliant, the peak of. And then as some lose faith in it, going back to the comment about Max Demant, the doctor, who was called a bookworm, meaning skeptical, someone who is now questioning the order of things, including divinity, because we've got naturalism and Darwinian theory is removing power of the church at this time. You get a group of men who, young men, who move away from the ideal of empire, but the pendulum swings sort of too far to decadence and decay. And this is something we've been seeing in the book all the way through. Joseph Roth is constantly looking at the high refinement of empire, sometimes the beauty, the elegance, the magnificence, the comfort that all that pageantry brings together to live in, to bathe in the sunlight of empire at its highest. This bonding ideal for all peoples, symbolized primarily by the Radetsky March itself, which was the anthem, really. It was vibrant, it was lively, it was based around the military. It was just a pageant. But as people have moved away from it, the uniforms are getting muddy. The people aren't taking care of themselves. There's more drunkenness in the ranks. The soldiers are going to brothels and fornicating in front of images of the emperor. The pendulum has swung as almost like the youth have got tired and are now kicking quite to the extreme. Slovenliness. And this is an idea that he brings up, because on this page he says the band in the local inn now only played twice a week in the cafe, but even then they were short of verve and spark. Now verve and spark, that's like the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Not the modern lot. It lacks verve and spark. In the absence of women wanting to dance, they switch to a classical repertoire. Look how they try and get their verve and spark back, and seem to spend more time grieving for the old days than playing. Now that is a great, great sentence for pinning this book together. What we've got here is the new generation who have been hobbled by the strictures of the way they've been brought up, not being cared for properly by their fathers because there's too much propriety getting in the way of natural filial love. But they want to break away from the old order, and yet they've lost their verve and spark. And the only way they can think of getting some back is to look backwards to how it used to be done. What is the point here? If you're taking notes in your book, you may want to write this. You don't have to agree with me, but contend with this idea. Write this in your book. The ideal of empire has not been replaced by any other ideal. I'll say that again. The ideal of empire, which this skeptical age, this youthful age is moving away from, its problem, the reason they are crushed by it, the reason there is a bleak future, is because they haven't replaced that ideal of empire with anything better. And so now they're in a no man's land, an uncertitude, a spiritual bankruptcy, as it were. No sense of purpose. They only have a very short sight of independence from empire, but nothing beyond that. And that means you've got nothing to stand for, nothing to live up to, nothing to give purpose to life. And no matter how, what's the word? Fake, not fake, that's not the word. No matter how silly some of the behaviours of the older men may have looked, like the fact that earlier in the book it said they had a particular way of getting off a train, they had a particular way of walking into a room. No matter how silly that refinement may appear or oppressive, what it did do was it bound a society together. People knew how to act as a collective. And that binds the 17 nationalities into one empire, into one ideal. And that's something Roth has spotted. when he stands at 1932 in Germany as a Jew with the Nazis on the brink of getting power. He sees what's come after the First World War, and it's been politically, particularly in the Weimar Republic of Germany, politically this fragmented mess, a morass of disparate ideas which will not cooperate together, where everyone goes their own way. They don't work together. And what Roth can remember about the empire is not so rose-coloured as it feels when you're reading it at this point. You realise what he's saying is there were problems. There was an inability to adapt, which inevitably doomed the empire, because the younger brigade weren't being taken care of or shown any direction. But ultimately, empire, the ideal, held people together. It gave society a meaning. And this was all done under, for Roth, it was done under the auspices of an almighty power. Interestingly about Roth, although a Jew, he later converted to Roman Catholicism. So evidently the writing of this may have done something to him. Whether he's right or not, that's a different question. But it's interesting what perspective he sees. There was a unifying ideal which everyone could buy into, and that's what binds society. And interestingly, you'll get a bit of this, quite a lot of this, in fact, through the book. The use of birds at this particular point. It says, by and by, the various nightingales from Olmütz, Hernals, and Mariahilf fluttered away. Interesting phrase, nightingales. The nightingale in literature symbolism is was mentioned by Shakespeare. It goes right back to Philomena, is it, in Greek tragedy? The nightingale is a symbol of lament. Hang on, somewhere around here. There you go, right. Here you go. The nightingale in Shakespeare's Sonnet 102. Our love was new, and then but in the spring, when I was wont to greet it with my lays, as Philomel in summer's froth doth sing, and stops his pipe in growth of riper days. The nightingale, it's a lament for previous times, a lament for the froth of summer and love. Remember, he was in love with Frau von Tausig, this affair. She symbolized Austria. Roth is saying he remembers those early days, but now the nightingale laments because the pipes, the singing pipes, the music of frothy summer has stopped in older days. The empire has grown old and it's just died on its feet, which is really sad. There is this sudden snap. This is not an empire that it would have gradually declined, but it didn't because of the World War, but it was going to crack. And it just suddenly vanishes. And this is the idea that Roth spots all the time, is that there was an ideal, at least, of empire that bound everyone together, and it's gone and not been replaced. And this is shown because they try and throw a party in the woods. Now, did you notice about this? It's the captain of horse, Jacques, was his name, in the Dragoons. To get a bit of verve and spark back into people, he says, let's put on a big summer party, similar to the sonnet there, the froth of summer. And they do it in this wood by Count Koznicki's place. And they hang the place up with paper chains and paper lanterns, and paper confetti is thrown. Notice this, it's not the gold, it's not the silver braid, it's not the luxurious elements that the empire once had. It's all paper. It's a faux imitation. It's a lesser glory. And they hang all of this up. But what are they doing? They're throwing a gala. They're looking back to the past. The only way to get any meaning, they're still, at least the old empire had some meaning. These galas, these parades bound everyone together. And that's what they're trying to do again. But they're doomed to fail because it's a pale imitation and they don't genuinely have a belief in it. And I found this just staggering. Let's just stop and think for ourselves how that would apply. If we disagree with something, a way of doing things, that's all well and good. but it leads to disaster if you remove that thing and don't replace it with an ideal equal to or stronger than what went before. Now, there's a way that we get to discuss an idea with someone who lived or wrote a book almost 100 years ago. It's saying we all need as a society an ideal to bind to. There's no point being perfectly independent. And this is borne out further as the book goes on then. Towards the end, look, we've not got much left. When they want to enhance their party, they hope that some aristocracy will come. Some better sorts of persons, it's called. So here again, these younger ones who want to break away and go into a new future, they still don't know how to make joy, how to find purpose without the old guard. At least they knew what they were about. At least they knew what they believed. And this, just before the party happens, did you notice there was that massive storm? Sorry, I'm just looking at some of, I'm just going past some bits. I don't want to over talk every page. There's, before the party, there's all these swirling of clouds and the swing of the branches moving in the air and sort of wailing. But the rain hasn't begun to come. And someone says there's going to be a storm. Well, of course, this is blatant foreshadowing of World War I. The empire is about to collapse. The new generation are thinking of doing something, and it's going to be hit with warfare straight away. There is then a break of thunder, and you get, let's see if I can find this. There it is. There's a crash of thunder, and there's a flash of lightning, and just before the crash of thunder, there's a couple of seconds delay, and a comment's made by Roth. It says it was only a second or two, but between the lightning and the thunder, a whole eternity seemed to fit. Now, that's the break between the future and the past right there. They've set up their party. They're trying to go forward with their new ideals away from empire because it's crumbling. But this storm hits right at that moment, symbolic of World War I hitting right at the break of empire and modernity. And the war was short, 1914 to 1918. It was like the flash of lightning followed by the rumble of the thunder of war. And in that small gap, a whole eternity fit in. I mean, how apt is that? You know, that's, thank you. You appreciate that too, Marion. The war was a whole eternity. Literally, history changed at that point. There was no gradual decline of empire. It just dropped. The whole system of civilization was sort of irreversibly altered at 1914. Everything changed. You think of all the glitz and glam that these soldiers wore, all the pomp and ceremony. Well, shortly after the war started, they realised how useless that was on the battlefield, and everyone got sort of more practical wear, and it was all muddy and grungy. Everything changed in that little gap. And what's so brilliant is Roth is writing this, like we say, as the elegy to the fall of empire, but as a reminiscence of what once was. Something that he, at least back then, even if it wasn't ideal, it was something to believe in that bound people together. And it has gone in a crack of thunder. And it's not been replaced. And this is borne out in the party, because during the party, we get the sudden announcement while everyone's dancing, getting drunk. We get that character races into the house and says, Archduke Franz Ferdinand has been shot. The heir to the throne has been shot. And this precipitates a strange kind of disaster. The disaster is foreboding. It's not actually hit. But what it does is it shows the broken aspect of society. Sorry, if I speak too fast, slow me down. What this Roth criticizes here, the New Order, because yes, the empire was crushing people. And yes, it was not ideal. And that's what I really appreciate about Roth's writing. He shows, particularly at the family level, the difficulties empire has brought about, the disconnect between the peasants and the top. But at least a spiritual ideal held them together. Now that we've got to this bookwormish, skeptical age, which has pushed people away from the divine rights to a more naturalistic, socialistic order, specifically nationalistic. This comes up a lot in the last few chapters. And you know with your history that it was the Bosnian nationals and the Slovene nationals that were part of the Black Hand, which killed thanks, Suzette. They were the ones that killed Franz Ferdinand, weren't they? But there was national movements everywhere. Literally, Hungary wanted to be away from Austria now because it was more of a suzerainty. It was more the Austrian Empire. It was called Austro-Hungarian because the Hungarians was a suzerainty. You had the Ruthenians, you had the Moldovans, you had the Bulgars. They all wanted independence. And this nationalism gets borne out in the party when Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets the heave-ho. You notice very quickly that there is a Herr von Nagy, and that is a Hungarian name, and he speaks Hungarian to lots of other people, and he calls the Franz Ferdinand a bad name, and all of them start talking in Hungarian, the Hungarian group, and they're the loudest. No one else can get a word in, but they can't understand. You see the fragmentation that was simmering beneath empire, and they wanted to. Hello, Artsy Tiger. They wanted to demonstrate their own nationalism. There's a phrase here. Someone was seized by a sudden panic that they shouldn't be outdone in their Magyar nationalism. So Magyar, still Hungarian. So you have this breakup. But then we have First Lieutenant Klinsky, who's born on the banks of the Moldau. Well, the Moldau is the Czech river. It's sort of the Czech national river. So we've got the Czech contingent pulled to another side. And then you have Jelicic, the Slovene, who loses his temper and says he hates Hungarians. These are all the nations or peoples under empire that are bound together. But they're all fragmenting. They all want their own way. And that's fine. And do you know, from our perspective today, with an anti-colonial, anti-empire sort of disposition, very democratic disposition, we often look at Austro-Hungary and think, yay, good on the nationals for getting their own way and getting out of empire. Now, I'm not commenting one way or another on that. I'm not politically minded. But what Roth is interestingly observing is that it's not all roses. This nationalistic breakup actually pitted a bunch of people against each other, taking away of the spiritual ideal. And I think that was what it was. It was higher than empire. At least God bound people together. I think that's what Roth's saying. May explain why he became a Catholic later. It at least bound people together. But when you go a self-serving way, when you take a higher aim out of your life and you simply focus on the basics of just the individual clique of race or ethnicity, it doesn't do anything good. It pits people against each other. And there's a little comment. It says the fatherland of the Trotters was crumbling and collapsing in pieces. So people may have got their independence, but humanity began to crumble and collapse. The empire was not a great thing. Of course, there was poverty like any other empire, and some people lived in grandiose luxury, which is just not on. But at least it bound people together, is what Roth's saying. This is why, despite its flaws, whenever he hears the Radetsky March, it's happy. It symbolizes the uniting of people under one focus. And unlike the other music that you hear at this point, which is tinny triangles, it talks about the music, You think of the Radetsky March, which had such verve. It was almost bombastic, so confident in itself, rather than this discordant, grating music that was being played later at the party and they all had to be kicked out, the band players. Do you see the difference? And so you've got this, if you remove one ideal of empire, you need to replace it with another ideal. But this is what the generation going into the 20th century did not have. They had nationalism and nothing beyond it, and it just went bang. A clap of thunder, an eternity between the flash and the crash. And after World War One, things don't get better. Society is no longer bound up in any form of ideal. It's become very more self-oriented. A sort of social Darwinism took hold in the 1920s at least, and you had the flapper movement and jazz, all a rebellion against the old order. The problem was it was self-consuming. You do look at a lot of this. I mean, you look at The Great Gatsby, other literature, look at what the youth were like in the 20s. They realized the shortness of life. They hated the old order for bringing the World War upon them. But at the same time, their own ideals of self-serving didn't give them any real joy. And Roth, remember, lived through that. And he was thinking back and thinking, we were happier in the empire. Things meant something. Whether you were totally bought into it or not, at least it bound people together. So this is what I get out of this book. The power of a greater ideal than the self. And all of the formalisms and the etiquette of the empire, yes, they got to a ludicrous pitch, but they at least let everyone perform for society. You know, you wore the correct clothes to a place. I'm not talking about being a snob, right? I don't fancy wearing a particular hat on a particular day, but things were done in order to show that you were doing what was proper, sort of an elevated ideal, an aspiration would be the word. In fact, I heard this recently by a social commentator. He was talking about the damage the Beatles did. There is a connection here. The Beatles, as in Ringo and John and all that lot, their music did to society. He says music before then was aspirational, and he was using Come Fly With Me as an example compared to She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. Now, I totally disagree with him on this because the Beatles also wrote The Long and Winding Road, which was brilliant. And then since then, you've had great pieces of music, such as Bohemian Rhapsody and, let's pick another one, Bridge Over Troubled Water. There's a lot still in people. His aspirational music was this, he used, you know, Come Fly With Me. I mean, that actually glorifies getting drunk. You know, that sort of life of razzmatazz and getting drunk and flirting. I don't think it was an elevated ideal at all. But his concept was, if you don't have aspirational ideas, society plummets. That's something that at least the empire had, and Roth realized it. It had an aspirational idea. It had a sanctity of life idea for people to live up to. Something that, although it needed to change because it wasn't fully right, the young generation wanted to move, but had no ideal to replace it other than self and nation, just nationalism, which nationalism is almost love of self on a grand scale, because it's you belong to my club, we are the same genetically. Okay, it just ate itself. So that I thought was brilliant by Roth. It suddenly, the whole thing comes together. There's the phrase, they tinkled, the triangles tinkled their glamorous, drunken, tiny laughs about the music playing at the party. This is as opposed to the Radetsky March, which is so vibrant, vivacious. You know, it bound people together. People start clapping in unison together with it. See, this is what Roth's talking about. He misses the bygone empire because at least everyone had a place and a meaning. Now everything is in the air, and boy oh boy was it in the air. I mean, look at that, 1932, you're only talking like see, January 33 was when Hitler became Chancellor, and then it was at 1934 you had Nuremberg race laws, in 1937 was it Kristallnacht? So the breakup because of nationalism was just awful. And it wasn't just Germany. All of Europe was just fragmented after the collapse of the empires. I'm not saying empires, I'm not an apologetic for empires, not at all. But at least people were bound by something higher than themselves. That's what he's saying. And then, irony is always one of the most powerful parts of writing. If you are a writer, you have to learn to master irony, because it gives a lot more meaning and depth to everything you write. Basically, Karl Joseph, right towards the end, says, Major, I want to leave the army. And the Major says, maybe you're right. You've got your whole life ahead of you. So he realized the empire was going down and said, you've got your whole life ahead of you. Well, that's an ironic statement, isn't it? It's dramatic irony, because we know, reading, that his whole life is not ahead of him, because they are months away from World War I breaking out. And as we know in the book, he gets shot in the head while getting water, and coming to a rather abrupt finish. This irony is something, again, Roth is looking at. They threw off the old ways because the young wanted, we can live our own life. It's our lives. We're not being bossed about by the hoi polloi and our parents and all that. We've got our own lives to live. We've got our own whole lives ahead of us. The irony being, without anything to live up to, without purpose, without something beyond material self, your life goes nowhere and you tend to injure yourself. Roth had seen people break down, both on a national, a local and an individual level, because life had lost all meaning. And that actually leads me to just a final little point about literature as a whole. If you were asked what binds all of the great literature together, what would you say it is? I'm actually going to wait, see what answers you come up with. If you were to take all of classic literature and try and distill it into what it all boils down to, what is all great literature fundamentally about, do you think? I haven't frozen, I'm just seeing if anyone wants to make an answer or make a comment. Marion, the human condition. Sorry if I'm out of sync. I can't help that. It is the human condition. It talks about the human condition, something just a little more specific. It's meaning. What is the meaning in my existence? You think of someone like Thomas Hardy, the guy is painful to read and beautiful and cathartic, because he recreating a lost world. Now we're going to pick up on that, Suzette. It's cathartic listening to Hardy, because you can tell that man is looking for meaning through his stories and his cogitations and his musings, but he can never put his finger on anything. That's why Hardy is so depressing. But why he's so attractive and pulls you in is because you are on that same inner struggle and journey to find out, what does it all mean? The problem of pain, the problem of suffering. What's my purpose on earth? And Roth finds the same thing. And I don't think he set out writing this deliberately, but he sort of got his own nostalgia. Now, you talk about recreating a lost world. Why did Roth recreate that lost world? There was a reason. Because his life had meaning then. And when he goes back into it, he could see, he points out through the whole book, where it was falling apart, where it was decaying, what was wrong with it. The fact that this sort of stagnation happened, which the inability to adjust because of the high levels of formalness had basically made them rigid, sort of starched to oblivion. Um, he points all of that out, but his life meant something then. And that's why the nostalgia is so great. That's why the Radetsky March rings out through this, because it was the anthem of meaning in his life. Where he was writing from was the fragmented world post-empire, which, although may be better for the individual to a degree, I mean, on a literal individual level, because you had more freedom of movement, overall for society, it had no real meaning. It was vapid. It was purely, well, born from 1918 all the way today is the materialistic modernist world and the postmodernist world, which ultimately is moribund in anything above our day-to-day life, above ourself. What are the great ideals today? So there's a spiritual bankruptcy even now. And that's something I found intriguing to contend with Roth. Do I agree with him? That's for a different, well, I'll have to think about that for a long time. But there's something he's onto there. And that's what all literature is about. And that's why this book suddenly drops into classics, why it suddenly speaks to people, because it confronts us with meaning. Going back to your point, Suzette, about reconstructing an old world. His world had meaning then. When we try to get meaning now, what do we need to do? We have to try and construct a world in our mind. When the society is fragmented, isn't it because, like with the loss of empire, the ideal was lost and no other ideal replaced it? And that will always, according to my understanding of this, because I believe him on this, if you don't have an ultimate ideal and a worthy one, you're doomed to fail. You'll never get contentment. These young men never found, granted, most of them were shot in the First World War, but they never found a connection to anything. They may not have liked how their fathers did it and lived, but they couldn't replace it with anything better. And by this point, actually, thank you, Marion, that summed up what I'm trying to say much better. They're having a massive identity crisis. But an identity crisis down to the most fundamental part of what it means to be a human. So mentioning the human experience. And that should, for those who sort of are listening to the books, that should be one of the things that speaks out. And I think the Radetsky March does it beautifully, because as you read it, beautiful prose, exquisite turns of phrase. I love his sort of distant touch. He watches from afar. There's a lot of the things happening through windows, which is probably not a deliberate ploy, but it says a lot about psychology, when in his mind, the way Roth describes things from perspectives of characters, they're looking through windows when it happens. It's like he's looking into a lost world, to something he can no longer touch. And if we listen to it, it should say to us, so what is the meaning of life? One of those questions that people mock because it's like, oh, you don't want to ask that first thing in the morning, it's too deep. But doesn't that say something about the modern disposition? That don't want to think about the meaning of life and then wonder why there's anarchy everywhere and distress in people's lives. Humans have always struggled for meaning. It exists out there. And I, for one, don't believe its meaning is whatever you want it to be, because otherwise this book would never have been written. There's definitely something in us that craves a higher calling of some sort. But what is it? Is there a truth out there? Is there a world to be constructed forwards that is actually pleasing? Now, I have my own views on that, but all I'm talking about here is, what does a classic book do when you read it? It opens up the soul. And if we use that, if this is why it's so educational beyond autobiographies, yeah, Putin's trying to recreate an empire, Exactly. But what kind of ideal? And the thing, again, with Roth, did the empire actually work? No, it didn't. Um, at least with the empire in Franz Joseph's day, it wasn't a megalomaniac. He was quite a simple sort. And people were allowed to sort of operate. But as soon as it fragmented, as soon as you took the ideal away, and that's something that's not there now, is it? There's no ideal of it. Okay, see you, Artsy Tiger. That's my son, by the way. You should be in bed. um, so yeah, that's what I got out of the Radetzky March. There are other bits I could have gone on with. The epilogue was just glorious. I'm going to read no, I won't read the last paragraph because I know you haven't read it, Mariam, and anyone else who's watching. The last two paragraphs in this book are worth reading the book for. It's just such beautiful pathos. It just hits you right in the heart. It's not the most rip-roaring read. It's not one that gallops. It's not one that's you're going to recommend to someone who wants to just be entertained. But this is a read to really just enjoy slowly at the quiet twilight, because it will make you think. It's so humane. It's just brilliant. I actually, the more I think about this book, the more I love it. I'm so pleased that you all read it along with me. And hopefully going into the next one, The Three Musketeers, which is a romp of a book, by the way, and has got nowhere near the kind of meaning and symbolism that this book does. It's still a tour de force in how to write. But I'm looking forward to having you all on the discussion boards where you can share your thoughts, your research, drop things in and out, you know, because that's what I want to do. I want if you want to understand why I've made the Classics Book Club, when you go on to the Discord server, go on to the page which says My Mission, and you'll understand what I'm trying to do through the Classics Book Club, and I hope that others want to buy into it as well. You know, just, you know, because there's a lot to get. I hope from this discussion, you see, for me at least, why the classics are so powerful. It's not just a book. It's a book that comes and is inspired by a deep, deep inner yearning, an inner search for meaning through the experiences of people who we've never met, but we can connect with their thinking, and they challenge us and they ask us questions. And he does not come to a perfect conclusion in this. Poor old Roth himself committed suicide. He was desperately confused. But you see what he was tussling with in this. And he was onto something. I think he had got a thread, just one thread of the tapestry of life that he was tugging at. Unfortunately, he couldn't stand back and see the whole thing. But then, how many can? So that was my thoughts on the Radetsky March. Absolutely loved it. I hope you loved it too. I hope this wasn't just a complete hour of me blithering an inane drivel. Yeah, really enjoyed the Radetsky March. A touching and moving book. And I think anyone can identify with it to a strange degree, considering it was set in an empire when people wore gold tassels and stuff and swords. Just phenomenal, phenomenal. So that's me done for the Radetsky March. If anyone's got any comments or questions, or you can talk about anything else, you know, my standard thing now is I will sit on for, you know, a good 5-10 minutes and just talk about whatever you want to talk about. Or if anyone else had other thoughts about the book that they want to suggest to me, because I'm always game for hearing other people's ideas and I go away and chew them over. It's a shame I messed up the schedule this time. Unfortunately, something came up yesterday and I couldn't be here. And I know others were getting ready for it. So I think I've thrown a few off their schedules, and so they're going to have to catch up on this. Sorry for those of you who are catching up. Sorry to have to delay by a day. Right, we've had someone else just log on. I'm about finished. I wish I knew what this was about. That sounds great. I missed the memo. I'm ready to read this in that. Oh, good. I'm pleased you're looking forward to reading it, Marion. I think you might really like this. Lorraine, this was over the past 4 weeks. I've been doing a doing a read along of the Radetsky March by Joseph Roth, written in 1932. It's like he's reflecting back on his time growing up in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it's tragic and sort of morose in places, hauntingly alluring. It just, or it digs at you. It's a slow read, a quiet read, but I was just saying it's almost worth reading it for the last two paragraphs. But each week we've done a section, and I've done about an hour's presentation live, and listened to what people have put on comments as well. But Lorraine, I hope you've noticed, because I know you follow me on Instagram. Means I can't sound too interesting. Well, they were for me anyway. Whether everyone else agrees, I don't know. But Lorraine, just to let you know, I have just started the Classics Book Club. And if you go to my last video, which has a picture of the Three Musketeers on the thumbnail and a circle with the Classics Book Club, the first comment in that is mine. It's been pinned, and there's a link to my Discord channel where I've just set up a discussion forum, and what we're doing is we're reading the Three Musketeers over the 4 weeks of March. On my Instagram you will be able to see, actually in the last video you'll see the actual reading schedule, so if you want to join us for that, by all means read a book, The Last Waltz, on how Strauss music defined the feel of Vienna and its identity. Oh, The Last Waltz. Yes, okay. Hang on, just drop this down. Last Waltz. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Oh yeah, The Musketeers, Lorraine, absolute, what a humdinger of a book. Like, absolutely out of this world, that book is. It's not a book in which you dig out great meaning. It's very much a romance. But what you do get from reading The Three Musketeers is an absolute tour de force in literature, like how literature and story is constructed. Brilliant ways of characterizing plot and its development, sense of intrigue and suspense. Everything about it is brilliant, and how to create an atmosphere of history even though you're making it up. I mean, because obviously he did have a bunch of characters who were real. Richelieu, King Louis XIII, D'Artagnan was real, Porthos, Athos, Aramis were all real. But the way he crafts it and makes you see it historically, even though it is just a potboiler, Dumas was just something else. I always tussle whether Three Musketeers or The Count of Monte Cristo is the better book. It's only the meaning and subtext in Count of Monte Cristo which I think makes it technically a more brilliant classic. But as far as writing goes, wow, The Three Musketeers is just wow, it's amazing. And it carries on 20 years later, and The Man in the Iron Mask, that's really good as well. The Man in the Iron Mask got a few twists in that you don't see coming, but same with The Three Musketeers. I'll see you on the forum for that. So please, anyone, if you know anyone else that wants to get into books, and classic books in particular, feel free to share my channel and tell them that the Classics Book Club is free for people to join, because most book clubs there's a charge to join. So yeah, there. Oh, you've just been sent that account of Monte Cristo. You lucky thing you. It is sublimely, oh, what a book. I don't know if anyone else here, there's only 6 people on, but if anyone else has read The Count of Monte Cristo, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Edmond Dantes. Oh, what a great opening to that book. And it just doesn't stop. He's brilliant at just fast pace. So yeah, that's really good. There was one other thing I was going to say. Ah, that was it. Right. So for any of you who carry on with the Classics Book Club, I'm not very good technically. And by Dumas. Yeah. Did I not say Dumas? Did I say someone else? Whoops. I'm not technically gifted. This has took me an age to sort of sort out this book club business. So sorry about not having as many videos on my channel as normal for just books. But I want to make this something that works for everyone. So as we go along, if you see things that you think could improve the book club, make it more enjoyable for others, if there's things that you see which I'm doing that are right and you really enjoy, point these things out to me so that I can make the Classics Book Club a forum, a place that's really beneficial to everyone who's looking to get more out of the classics. It's a club that's not just for reading a book, but for chewing it over, for discussing different ideas, applications, meanings, you know, learning how, maybe with the Three Musketeers, how literature itself works, how to construct story. Others may be the deeper underlying motifs, the hypotheses which authors have in their mind or exploring. I want the book club to do that because there's people around the world who would like to grow their understanding of literature, but they can't afford to go on a college course or haven't got the time to go on a college course. And so by having more in-depth discussions, and I'll do this, although I'm self-taught myself, I'm not claiming to be a professor, it could just help others who want to get more out of literature, beyond just the story. So if you come up with any ideas, just pass them on to me, and slowly but surely I will introduce them. More fun than college, to be honest. Good. I am pleased. Actually, one of my big beefs with college is the agenda. There is often, you unfortunately get a hive mind begins to develop in the walls of academia. And sometimes it's better to come at the classics from outside. Most literary criticism nowadays approaches a book with a critical approach. I've read plenty of literary criticism. Oh, thanks, Lorraine. But I believe that the correct approach to reading literature is to stand within the book and let it approach you, not you approach it. If you approach it with any idea, you're going to find proof of that idea through your own bias. Whereas standing within a book and letting it talk to you, much more powerful. And when you do that with a group of people, you get to see it from different eyes, and lots of different nuances stand out to people. And I think you get a better understanding, the sympathetic understanding that I think it's the best you can get is with a group of people looking at it like that. So, but I do know there's lots want to get into it, but you know, they can't afford to pay for going to a book club or a course, or because most book clubs have got a monthly payment. So I don't want to do that because I would rule out certain people who, through no fault of their own, can't afford it. So you know, I've been in that place myself. So yes, so pass this on to everybody, share the love, and let's see if we can make a community that's great. And anyone else that's on here, Marion leaves comments. Marion's not even read the Radetsky March and yet watches this. She has a brilliant, brilliant YouTube channel. I love listening to Marion. In fact, I listened to one of yours just today, your mini book haul, and I do like the look of those Arabian Nights by Barnes & Noble. That was a very fancy looking book. So go and subscribe to Marion, everybody. And yes, until the next time, say it with me. I wish you joy in your reading. Not kind enough, Marion, you deserve it. I love your channel. You've got just one of the nicest ways of talking. It's a delight to listen to. Right. It is, my clock stopped. Right. It's getting late here. It's about 10 o'clock. So I am going to sign off. Adieu, everybody.